Good morning and welcome to the May 9th meeting of the Citizen Oversight Board. Glad to have everyone from the board on today. We have two special guests, Sheriff Diggins and Executive Director of Safety, Armando Saldate. I'm not sure how we're ending up with you guys sandwiched on the same meeting regularly, but we'll eventually get you untangled and you can have your own show in the future. But thank you for accommodating the scheduling now. Okay, so a few announcements. We remain with a vacant seat on the Citizen Oversight Board, so continue to push for folks to both apply and for the mayor's office to move through a selection. We had a candidate who was filling a role, and that actually was somebody who didn't qualify, so they were on the board for all of 12 seconds and then off the board. So we were almost full, and then we were not full.
I did recruit
another
one
matter.
person.
What's that?
I did recruit one person. We'll see.
Okay, great.
Whether they fare well.
Yes. into the mystery that is the
black hole of selection process.
Yes, yes, exactly. All right, wanted to make a note that earlier this week, the COB took a position on the what's known as sort of the red light or license plate reader program, ALPR, and the city was looking to extend a contract for that. The COB took a position to oppose that contract for a number of reasons. One was it had extended beyond sort of what was discussed with us initially when the program was launched, in that city data sort of makes its way into a national database and seemed to be shared pretty unrestrictedly in a way that made the board concerned about sort of national surveillance and some other sort of concerns around data management. So there's probably more discussions that the board will have today, should we have time, on that topic, because what we understand is the city has decided to fund that program for a number of additional months, sort of through an extension of the existing contract rather than a new contract. And there's a lot of complexity there. So just a note to the community. Let's see. I'd like to ask for approval of the minutes from our April 25th meeting.
Move to approve the minutes for 4/25. Yeah.
Yep. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. The motion passes. That is good. And we can move into discussion, I think, first with Sheriff Diggins. And Sheriff, I know we provided you with some questions in advance. And so we'll start there. First, I want to congratulate you on some of the more innovative programs that you've recently launched. And I know a number of board members were at the sort of press conference related to the clothing project. It would be great if you could sort of give a brief overview of that. And you know, the board has always been enthusiastic about humane treatment of those in custody, connected with both the visitation process, but also just, you know, generally thinking about people in custody as important people in the world. Yeah, just love to hear more from you about that to start, and thanks for moving that forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I begin, please allow me the opportunity to thank the men and women of the Denver Sheriff's Department who show up every single day to do a phenomenal job of serving the community 365 days a year, 24 hours, 7 days a week. They are on the front line of public safety. And so I just want to make sure that I take a moment to tell them thank you and appreciate the opportunity to be before the board again. And thank you all for those that were able to be with us last Thursday as we launched a innovative project in the Denver Sheriff's Department, something that's not being done in any other jail in the country, in fact. But I don't believe that we're going to be the last. In fact, I've already had jurisdictions reach out to me to ask about the idea and perhaps replicating it as well. I'll just go right into the questions, Madam Chair, because the first one has to do with the in-person visitation. We start with congratulations on the start of your new clothing project for in-person visitation. For the benefit of people who aren't aware, could you give a brief overview of the project? So last year in 2024, we returned to contact visits, in-person visits at the Denver County Jail. This was a project which was in the making for about 7 years. In fact, at that point in 2017, then independent monitor Nick Mitchell posed the idea to the Denver Sheriff's Department about could we or would we consider returning to that practice. In 2005, we went to video visitation only because one of the ways that we found that contraband, primarily narcotics, was being introduced into our facilities was through contact visit at that time. So the Denver Sheriff's Department, along with practically every other sheriff's department in the nation, went to video visitation at that time. In the years that passed, we began to understand that having a physical connection with a loved one is important to someone returning back to the community better than how they came to us. In fact, we visited a jail in San Diego, California, the Las Colinas detention facility, which is run by the San Diego Sheriff's Department. Some of the folks that were a part of that work group went. Director Saldate, I believe, may have went, or I'm not sure if he's been there, but I know Nick Mitchell took a visit there along with myself and others. And we saw that contact visits actually did work. And so when we came back, we put together a work group, and that included internal interested parties, deputy sheriff members, professional staff, along with other city staff and community members as well. And from that group, we decided that we should return back to in-person visitation. And so we got the funding from City Council and began to move forward. And then in 2020, the pandemic happened. So it put the project on pause for a couple of years. And as we began to come out of the pandemic, we still knew that this was not just a priority for us, but the community as well. And we were very happy to launch that project last year at the county jail. It's a normalized environment. I would encourage folks who have not seen the room to go online. There are stories about it that the media has done about it. In my opinion, a very beautiful space with great artwork by a formerly incarcerated person, soft features such as carpeting and bright colors and chairs and private rooms for parents to visit with children, with decals from Disney and Pixar and the like. So it's just a very wonderful space. But when we had that ribbon cutting last year, I had a God moment, is what I call it, an idea about us moving to do something that hadn't been done before, which was allowing the people that are in custody to also change into regular clothes to have their visits. So we have this great normalized environment, but when kids see their parents in inmate uniforms and the like, we know that that has a traumatizing effect. So we have this great environment, and we want to move forward with lessening the trauma that families have when they see folks that are coming into custody. And so last Thursday, we launched the in-person visitation clothing project. We partnered with Councilwoman Lewis from Council District 8, who connected us with Goodwill, and they have been a great partner with us in donating the clothes that we now have as a part of that project. We also have shoes that we purchased as a department to facilitate someone being fully dressed when they come into the visit room. And we believe that this is going to help people to connect better while they're in our custody with their families. It's going to help them to just feel like they're a parent in a room or a family member in a room when they come in, rather than feeling like they're in custody. And so we think that it's a great idea. Appreciate the community support. Thankful for the board members that were there as well. And certainly would love to answer any questions that you all may have.
Sheriff, I just want to thank you and the councilwoman, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on her name right now.
Councilor
But
Lewis.
yes, who were the instigators of this project, and I really appreciate the intent. And hopefully you receive a lot more donations for that project to move forward, because obviously we saw the room in which the clothing is being stored, and there's a lot of room there for you to grow. So.
There is. We look forward to the project flourishing and it becoming a model for other departments to follow as well. All right.
Hey, Sheriff. I also had a question. I know that there was a House bill in the legislative session this year that kind of was trying to extend that right to visitation for the entire state, including Colorado prisons, and so was wondering if you guys had any stance or any perspective, especially speaking to the value of people being able to have that contact with their loved ones that are incarcerated.
We believe that it's a significant benefit to folks while they're in custody. We know that those connection points that you have when you actually hug a person is something that we all value as just human beings. And so being able to provide that to the people in custody who are coming back to the community, we think is a motivating factor for them to continue to do better while they're here, but also keeps them connected to their family and friends prior to their release.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that, and I'm in full agreement. I was just wondering if you had any, if you guys provided any testimony, if you guys provided any advice around like the House, the statewide legislation that is trying to like enact similar policies to what you guys got going on.
No, we haven't been contacted about the legislation. We'll be happy to talk to someone if they wanted to see what we're doing. So we'd be more than happy to do that.
Thank you, Sheriff.
The next question that we sent regards kind of getting your reflection, Sheriff, on the recommendations that we had in our annual report. And I just maybe I'll read those out loud since, you know, maybe not everybody did a close read of our annual report. So the recommendations that we had included expanding the Denver Health Dashboard to include timeliness of prescriptions and eyeglasses, as well as the details about the subject of grievances. Of course, not at the individual grievance level, but more at the aggregate level, so that folks understand, you know, ophthalmology may be going well, but like people getting access to their MAT is going less well, or, you know, we seem to be ignoring chest pain, or, you know, whatever else that is, timeliness, whatever may come up in terms of trends. So that's the first one. The second is ensuring that DSD has access to Denver Health's after action reports or investigations following serious incidents. We know from a death in custody last year or the year before that there was some confusion about sort of what the reporting lines were and who was to receive information. And it seemed like a true lack of transparency there, particularly in terms of public accountability. Next is identify and address the reason behind the significant drop in civilian staffing. We always talk about the shortage on the deputy side, but we also saw at DSD this year a significant decline in civilian retention. Next is around building a process to encourage the use of your new in-person visitation facility. So obviously the topic we just talked about is working to address that. But if you have other topics you want to cover there, we'd be happy to hear that. And then continue to invest in overdose prevention efforts for those in custody. I understand there was another death in custody this week. You know, there has been a concerted effort around overdoses, but you know, it continues to be a big concern, both I think for the board and the public. That's sort of the main gist of the recommendations. I'm trying to think if there was anything else that covers you all, but I think that's good to start with.
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you for breezing through those, because I actually had them written down to read through verbatim. So you capture them more in a Reader's Digest version. So thank you for that. Those recommendations for the public are in the COB's annual report on page 33. Let me start with the first one. We certainly want to continue to improve upon the dashboard. Thought that was a good recommendation from the COB. Our jail medical administrator, Ronnie Brown, is working with Denver Health to improve those data reporting outcomes. And so we will certainly take that into consideration and will add those measures. The after action reports and internal investigations is something that we can talk to Denver Health about as we're moving through the 2026 operating agreement, and certainly believe that that would be helpful for us, not just as a department, but also for the Public Integrity Division under Director Saldate's purview. We should continue, or we will continue to work to build up our professional staff in the programs area, and that's primarily where those staff were from. And we continue to say that this is a very tough environment for anyone to work in. We appreciate people who want to help people come back to the community better than how they came to us. Our professional staff work side by side with our deputies every day. It is one of our top priorities. In addition to hiring uniform staff, is hiring those professional staff. We talked about the in-person visitation. We're going to continue to make that program robust. And we do continue to have a very laser focus on overdose prevention efforts for those in custody. Let me pause for a moment to talk about the death this week that you spoke of. We send our deepest condolences to the family of the man that died in our custody. And I'll just share with you that on May 7th at 9 p.m. At the downtown detention center, he was discovered non-responsive in a housing unit, and a medical emergency was called by the deputy that was there, and life-performing measures were attempted by the medical staff, and he was pronounced later after that discovery. Because this is a death in custody, the Denver Police Department is conducting an investigation, and the identity of the person, his cause of death, and the notification of death are being made by the medical examiner in order to ensure that that process stays as clean as possible. There isn't anything else that I can add to that situation. So I'll answer any other questions that you all may have from the previous recommendations that the COB made. And if there aren't any questions, yes, Rufina.
Yes, Sheriff Diggins, so just for my own information, when a person is brought in into custody, are they given a medical screening of sorts?
Yes, ma'am. They are. Denver Health is a part of the intake process. They have nurses who do a complete medical screen of every single person prior to them moving on to housing.
Okay, thank you. And how extensive would that be? Would that just be a questionnaire, or would that be tests if needed? Or I don't understand the scope.
It could be both. The questionnaire is very extensive, and if there are additional tests that need to be done, then Denver Health would conduct those as well. If you would like, I could give you a tour of the intake area at some point, and you could see the medical process and see the questionnaire that's being asked by Denver Health.
At the time that I went through the tour of the center, we went through the physical part of the intake process. So this is something that I didn't actually hear about then.
Yeah, if we didn't go over by the medical area, we have 2 nurses stations that are over by the fingerprint station, and their office there. And as the deputies take folks through the booking process, they actually go in a private setting with those nurses to go through a full medical screen by Denver Health.
Okay, if you could just forward the questionnaire, that would be fine.
Okay.
Thank you. I did have a question on the part relating to access to Denver Health reports, and you said that you would be talking to them. I assume that conversations have already been held, correct?
We've had some preliminary conversation with Denver Health about that and those are ongoing. So we'll just reiterate the importance of having access to those during the negotiations and the operating agreement.
And so, is there any resistance to your having access, or is there just logistics to be worked out?
I think it's logistical more than anything. And of course, there are attorneys that are at the table on both sides. And so it's really a conversation more so from their standpoint where we continue to talk through things.
Okay, thank you.
Karen?
Good morning, Sheriff.
Morning.
I was curious to know if the inmate experienced issues shortly after being brought through the system, or if he had been there for several days when the overdose occurred. Can you answer that question?
First, let me share with you, Karen, there is no indication at this point that this was an overdose. That has to be determined by the medical examiner.
Okay.
Been in our custody for less than about 24 hours, maybe just a little bit more than 24 hours. And there isn't anything else that I can share that would not compromise the investigation by the police department.
Okay. And are your deputies trained to administer the Narcan?
Yes, ma'am. Not only are they trained, but they are required to have Narcan on their person when they're working.
Okay. And that was that administered to this particular individual?
Again, Karen, I can't
Okay.
divulge any particular information related to the incident.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions on that topic?
All right, seeing none, Madam Chair, I'll move on to question 3. Reporting from March indicated that you were part of the mayor's strike force signal group chat, which at least for a time included auto-deleting messages. There are several sub-questions. I'll read through those. Did you have any concerns about participating in a secret auto-deleting communications chat? That particular group was started in January for internal staff to easily keep track of and share information regarding federal actions that impact Denver under the new administration. It was not secret and was always subject to the same rules that any other messages are subject to. The next part of that question is, do you know why Signal was used for these conversations instead of regular text or Microsoft Teams? No, I do not. It was determined by the mayor's office. Are you still a part of the strike force group chat? No, I am not. And are you a part of any other Signal group chats with city staff? No, I am not. And I'll pause there to answer any questions.
Can you just talk a little bit about how data retention or discoverability would work with a sort of non-city issued app like that? Typically, when you're doing, CORA requests or FOIA requests, the intake process is sort of based on a tool that the city has for discovery. I know this personally because I used to have the team that did that for our state agency. And so I'm just interested in how that might work if the tool is not connected to city infrastructure.
That is a question. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. That's a question that is beyond my technical knowledge, but that is being managed by the mayor's office.
Follow up with our question there. Other questions from board members on this topic?
Okay. Seeing none, I'll move on to the next question. You are likely aware that DPD is working on introducing an education-based discipline to their discipline process. Are you actively planning on implementing something similar on the DSD side? At the moment, we're not actively planning on implementing something similar on the DSD side. However, I believe that Chief Thomas is one of the best law enforcement leaders, not just in the state, but in the country. I think he is doing this for the right reasons, and should this be successfully implemented in the Denver Police Department, we may explore doing so as well. And I'll pause there for questions.
Well, one of the reasons that he's considering implementing it was that, in his view, the process that they have now is too long. Do you have the same concern?
I think we have expressed a number of times that our discipline process does take a lot longer than we would like, along with Director Saldate and Liz Castle, since she's been the independent monitor. We have had conversations regarding that and are figuring out ways to shorten that timeline.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Seeing no other questions, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, great. Are there any sort of open questions for Sheriff Diggins that we did not sort of ask in advance?
Well, thank you all for your support. Next Tuesday, we do have our fallen deputy memorial ceremony at the county jail. And I know some of you have attended that in the past. We welcome your attendance there again. And thank you.
Yep, appreciate your time today, and we'll be in touch soon. See you soon, and thanks for the invite.
Thank you.
Armando, Chief Saldate, where did you go? There you are. Great. Executive Director of Safety, Armando Saldate, thank you for joining us today. As with Sheriff Diggins, we provided some questions in advance. As we did with the sheriff, I will sort of highlight some of our recommendations before you answer the first question, because our first question is, can you respond to the recommendations in our annual report? And so let me pull those up and sort of highlight those before we get started. And I should say, welcome to the meeting. Thank you for being here. Let's dispense with niceties right away. Okay, let me get to the question, the recommendations. So we had a number of recommendations at the Director of Safety level. So the first is really thinking about the operations of the AIU, Administrative Investigative Unit, to avoid backlogs. You know, as has been expressed, the timeframes for disciplinary actions can be quite long, and AIU is a step in that process that can be quite long. The next recommendation is provide the OIM with the opportunity to review and comment on post-appeal settlements. And so the issue in this case is that the monitor's office has a right to comment on all elements of a negotiated agreement regarding discipline. And oftentimes the sort of post-settlement stuff is sort of handled in a way, informally is the wrong words, but it's sort of less of a prescribed process. And so we've had some examples recently where, you know, some decisions after an appeal have been made and the OIM didn't necessarily get to weigh in on those. Next is promptly address proposed discipline and avoid unnecessary delays. This relates to the fact that we've seen some slowness in the movement of decisions to your office and then also from your office in terms of sort of getting to a final outcome. Next is finalizing a policy regarding the disclosure of settlements with non-monetary terms. So this is obviously something we have been advocating for a long time. You've made you know, significant progress in being responsive to our requests with regard to increased transparency on the non-monetary settlement terms. And what we're hoping for is, you know, internal policy development that institutionalizes that beyond, you know, your tenure in the role. And then emphasizing the importance of better communication with complainants. We had a recommendation for the police department, which was improving the letters closure letters sent to complainants with regard to the outcomes of their complaints. And what ended up happening was a letter that gave no more information, but then instead asked people to pay for records that they were going to receive regarding their complaint. So it definitely didn't quite hit the mark of what we were asking for. And then a couple of other things. The biggest recommendation in terms of significance in its impact on the time frame for disciplinary actions would be, developing an approach that we could do concurrent administrative investigations with criminal investigations, so that they are not, so that the administrative investigation is not delayed significantly by civil court cases. Lastly, there are a couple of other ones that are sort of in the other recommendations category, and that is increasing halfway house capacity and creating a public database of disciplinary orders. There's one more which relates to the availability of information to the public via a dashboard that connects to the case management system that the office uses. It's something we've talked about for a long time and was of interest, Director Saldate, to you when you began, and I know you've cited some financial, the cost of that system being a barrier, but we continue to advocate for increased information being available to the public. So with that, I will turn it over to you to sort of respond to those recommendations.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me on today. I'm happy I could also hear the sheriff's presentation to you all and the questions you offered him. I too was a big supporter of his first in-person visitation. I worked on that prior to this role on that team that was working with then Monitor Nick Mitchell, and then also in-person visitation, and was ecstatic when the sheriff introduced the idea of the dressing out in civilian clothes, and I'm happy to support all those initiatives and all the things that the sheriff has been doing to improve our jail. One of my reflections when I was there, and I spoke to Daniel and Don and other board members, Mr. Hernandez, who was there, was that we've come a long way from that time period where we were under so much reform, so much negative had happened with the sheriff's department, and to be participating in that and talking about where we've come and how we're now innovative, and other sheriff's departments across and jails across the country looking at us to emulate our practices, was a good feeling. Still lots of work to be done, particularly around overdose and this new phenomenon that we've been dealing with fentanyl, and what it has changed the way security and custody environments around the country are dealing with. But I just wanted to give some reflection to that. On your all's recommendations, first of all, thank you for your report. I have had time to read through it and go through all the recommendations for all our departments and the other recommendations that you have. I also appreciated the thoroughness and diligence that you all put into the work of the oversight that you do, and how you document, and the accountability that goes behind that. I appreciate everything around the recommendations for all our departments, specifically the ones you just mentioned. Definitely, you'll find I'm in agreement with most of all, not all of it. We are working to improve in many ways, and taking the recommendations of the Citizen Oversight Board and the input that you all provide is going to be imperative for us to continue to grow and do better. On the first one, in regards to that, the monitoring, close supervision of the administrative investigative unit, particularly around timelines, not only the thoroughness of investigations, but the efficiency in which they're being done, and the timeliness that they're being done. There was experience, the backlog that we've been dealing with For the past couple of years, a lot pointed towards deficiencies in the leadership, and we did have some leadership transition through that time period. We worked closely with a lot of folks in identifying and interviewing for the new manager of the Administrative Investigation Unit. Now, she's not new, but she is created Elizabeth Brett. We were able to hire her from her oversight positions in Chicago and come here. She came here with a wealth of experience in oversight, working with independent monitoring, and her legal background, I think, really helped her hit the ground running to really fix a lot of the deficiencies around case management, around how we were approaching cases, and then also the quality of those cases. What I also found was it just wasn't going to be done by hiring a good manager. We needed to support her better from the department, from the executive director's office. So we have had that. We've been very involved in her first her onboarding and then her implementation of improvements for the AIU, and we are supportive of that. I think it's evidenced by I participate in case management meetings with all the individual investigators. I routinely am working with them and our conduct review analyst on those improvements. We are working on those innovations and are working with Elizabeth very closely on the improvements in performance management that she has undertaken and well underway. I hear good reviews from our independent monitor, and if any issues are brought to my attention, we address them swiftly and in partnership with the monitor. So thank you for that one, and I think we are seeing much better timelines, much better processing of cases. Still more improvement, but we're still working on it. The post-appeal settlement practice to ensure compliance with ordinances, that is definitely had some deficiencies in it, as you pointed out, Chairwoman, around there. And let me give you the example of what that is. So, we have a disciplinary finding, and in that finding, there may be an appeal, and as part of the appeal process by that individual employee and maybe their legal representation, the city may agree to a settlement that will address that appeal and therefore close the case. That settlement could result in the changing of the discipline, a changing of those what the discipline was. What we were finding is that there were times where that appeal or that settlement had not been reviewed by the monitor for her input, for the independent monitor's input. So that is something that we now that we are addressing, that we are working on, and we will formalize that into policy, that more appeal process. I've worked closely with our independent monitor on how we can really cover with policy those atypical kind of things that happen in our system, so we make sure that we do not have those gaps in the future. So that will be a policy, and once we get that policy finalized, I will share obviously with our independent monitor with you as well and the board. The insurance to properly address any discipline orders and mitigate unnecessary delays in the process. Yes, that is as was stated during the sheriff's presentation, as was talked about in the education-based discipline discussion, ongoing discussion around timeliness and the length that sometimes these cases take. It is an issue. I've been involved with investigations, administrative investigations, and some of the problems around timeliness since I first started here in the city. When I hired on in 2014, I was one of the individuals that was hired on to be brought in to help fix that backlogs and things that were happening in the sheriff's internal affairs process, which brought upon the PID and all those things. So I've had this conversation, I participated in this discussion at many levels throughout the years that I've been here, the over 10 years that I've been here. I've seen marked improvement in that processing. However, I think we also have to recognize, especially as we compare ourselves to other, the timelines that other jurisdictions may have, is that we need to understand that in Denver, we have a very robust monitoring independent oversight system. that independent oversight system does add some time to it. I'm not going to say that's the only reason why it's long. There's a lot of reasons. We're very thorough. We do lots of things. We have a high volume of cases, but there is time in there where there's an investigative review time for the monitor, and there's also a discipline review time. So that is also going to be something that's a reality, and we just never want to have any investigation rush through the process and have it affect the quality, the fairness, and all those things. However, to have a good quality investigation, a fair investigation, a good disciplinary outcome, timeliness is imperative. And so that's why we continue to try to figure out ways to improve that. One way that we have done that is through some of those more routine administrative cases that are low level. We try to do scheduled discipline, which fall within a matrix. So on first offense types of things, those things can be handled more expeditiously. So that is something we've done. We look to work on that. We look to try to do more things that we can handle other than the formal disciplinary process. So also that we can, those resources that we have for internal investigations could be more time spent on those serious misconduct matters as opposed to low level matters. The formal policy requiring the publication of any settlements that include non-monetary items. Thank you for
just before you move on from that one.
Yep.
I do have sort of a question or a comment, or maybe just a point of discussion. You know, I think the board will never advocate for less oversight. So, you know, whatever delays or time that independent oversight adds to the process, I think that is clearly not our concern. You know, where we see delays is often in internal departments, sharing information with one another, people sitting on reports for months, you know, things sort of taking time to move their way through the internal safety department processes. You know, I am interested in sort of sitting down with the police department and your office to really look at, you know, typical timeframes for different, you know, case types, and of course the monitor's office being there as well. You know, and really looking at sort of where lags are and what are the root causes of you know, timeframes or things taking a long time. You know, we had suggested a concurrent administrative and civil. We'll get to that as well. But you know, I'm not sure that we've sort of gotten to the root of, you know, why it is that things take so long. I would also say that the board is never advocating for rushing through disciplinary actions, right? That's not it. It's really, let's be the most efficient and effective with that possible. You know, oftentimes I think we see significant time being added when there's a lot of disagreement on the outcomes. And so I feel comfortable with that. Maybe the board doesn't, but I think, you know, if we're having conversations about hard choices, you know, surely that's something where time is important. On the other hand, you know, sometimes there's a long time between the action and the discipline because it takes a long time to schedule the use of force board, right? That happens only once a quarter. So that's automatically adding 3 or 4 months to the process. You know, we're still looking at cases from years ago in some cases because of perhaps civil actions or other things. There's also, you know, some amount of time that gets added because the decision is a bad decision, and there's a lot of going back and forth on sort of how that should be better applied in terms of the matrix. So, you know, I think our point of view there is like, let's spend more time understanding where there is important time that's added to the process, right? We're slowing down because we need to have the right kind of conversation, or there's friction, slack, you know, extra stuff added into the process that's not adding value. And so I just sort of want to clarify that, like, of course, independent oversight is going to add some time, and that is of great value to the community, but that is not at all the area that we're concerned about. Yep. So I want to be really clear on that.
Yep. Thank you. I totally understand that. I have done some of that root cause analysis, like I said, in the time I've been here through the years I've been here in the various roles, been very close to this situation, worked on committees with monitors and previous folks that have worked in this space. I could tell you one of the biggest root causes is the volume of cases, the caseloads. The caseloads leads to time. And then when you put caseloads around scheduling of interviews, working out interviews, timing with the representation and all those things, volume, I think, is the number one contributing factor to the number of, that's why I mentioned the fact where we can do these scheduled discipline cases and lower the volume. That's always been something that I've advocated for. And please know that I've never said that I think we shouldn't have oversight. I think that that's a necessary thing, and I think it's built into our process, and it will therefore will always be longer, and I think for good reason. But yeah, I think volume is one, and then performance management is another one, and that is something that we have addressed. We've addressed it head on with folks, and we are continually work at. That is why I am participating in case management briefings with individual investigators to gauge where it's performance management or where it's process. So I can get through that and I can hear directly, so then I can make change and we can push those improvements. So yeah, definitely understand and agree with what you said there. Going to the formal policy for the publication of the settlements, thank you for acknowledging and for bringing this to the board, or to our, that first, that the community wanted more from this and wanted this enhanced, this exposure and transparency. I was happy to and have been very transparent about that, and we've instituted everything that we've committed to enable that. I think formalizing it in process and policy is one thing. I also think, an ordinance that's being formalized. And so I think those things are hand in hand and complementary, but I'm happy to support formalizing it in policy so it lives beyond my tenure and then within the best practice of what we do. The importance of communication with community complaints, I hear you loud and clear on that. That is something we do have to do better on. It is something that we, as you mentioned, we worked with the monitor on initially with the police department. I don't think that we came to a satisfactory conclusion on that. There is room for that, not only with our complainants on police cases, but also complainants in our AIU cases. So I'll continue to work on that, and we'll be happy to hear any input that you all have in that process and interview and have you all. I think I saw something happen on screen. So Daniel, do we have, or Chairwoman, do we have questions?
Go ahead, Karen.
Yes, sir, I had a question with regard to your mention of the PID. And it was basically that I was wondering, what is your assessment of how effective the PID has been, understanding that it's been implemented, as I recall, for at least, 2 years, if not longer?
Yes.
And its design was to focus on lower level complaints in way of facilitating the administration of discipline when necessary and review process.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. The AIU has been, or the PID, Public Integrity Division, was brought into existence prior to my being the executive director here in Denver. However, I helped Director Riggs at the time with its formation and previous management there go through that, and then obviously when I took over, it fell under my leadership. I think it was, and I should explain just for everyone so everyone's on the same page. It replaced the Denver Sheriff Department's Internal Affairs Bureau. In fact, if you go back to the Hillard Hines and OIR recommendation, one of the things coming out of that was, back then in the reform, and I was part of that, they hired outside investigators to come in and help reform that. Hillard Hines OIR and their recommendations to the city said that was a good thing to do, and that should be expanded and explored further and done that. That's where the Public Integrity Division with then Monitor Nick Mitchell came to fruition and started that. There has been some growing pains. There were some things, but I would say on the on it, on what we were hoping to establish. And one thing I will agree, it's not that it was just meant for low level. It was for any administrative misconduct, which could include serious misconduct that would could include termination and suspension. In fact, the intention was to the low level things that could be resolved through scheduled discipline and other things. We were hoping to increase that so that we could focus more on serious disciplinary matters. Also bringing in outside investigators with investigative expertise was something that we were working on. Also, so we weren't taking away from our sheriff's department and their staffing around that. There have been, I think, overall, it's been a success. We continue to work on those successes, and we're trying to continue to look at how we can better and improve our processes, particularly around timelines and the quality of investigations.
So do you anticipate, or would you consider implementing the same type of group of folks to review low-level cases involving the police department in light of what you think is the effectiveness of the PID?
So right now, that we have, right now, we're not considering that. We're not considering the police department or creating a similar PID or having the PID have oversight over the police department. The police department's Internal Affairs Bureau has functioned well. It's done a really good job of what it was. In fact, we tried to mirror some of the best practices with the police department into the Public Integrity Division and how we formulated their things. That has not been something. It has been something I will acknowledge that was brought forward by the Reimagining Public Safety and Policing Task Force. And that was something that was talked about, but currently that has not been discussed. We do have that. There's also a very important element that our Denver Police Department Internal Affairs does, and they also do it for the sheriff's department. That is the investigation of criminal complaints that could be criminal internal investigations. And so therefore they have jurisdiction and they have the training and expertise to do the criminal side of investigation. So that is something that I wouldn't be looking to take away from them.
And so do you think that the idea of the EPD is a reasonable way to dispense with the delays that are being complained of?
Did you mean the education-based discipline?
Correct.
Well, so yeah, I think there's a question later on that I'll address that directly around what my beliefs are with the education-based discipline. I've always been an advocate for ways to deal with low-level disciplinary matters in alternative ways, that if we could find that they will have better outcomes, that we will not repeat behavior and things like that, and they could be done more efficiently. I am going to advocate for that. Now, when it comes to the education-based discipline in general and how it was proposed and how it got started and the involvement of the monitor at the beginning, that did not go as I was desired or as I had been informed. So we are working on that. I think that what needs to be done for sure is we need to be very clear, meaning the Denver Police Department needs to be very clear on what is education-based discipline eligible and what is not. That needs to be very clear. I think that is where there is confusion in community. I think there's confusion in the rollout of it, in that people thought that there would be no punitive actions for serious misconduct, which is not the goal of this. The goal of this, if it's a use of force case, serious misconduct case, that will go through the normal investigatory and administrative investigation process. But those lower level matters that result in maybe a written reprimand or that similar type of discipline, there should be areas where we could train our folks and hopefully have better outcomes around not repeated behavior, and that they're resolved more quickly than waiting a year to get a written reprimand.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think I covered the recommendations from you all. I do want to say I do agree with the halfway house capacity. We're working very hard on that. That's something that we continue to try to expand. Oh, I do want to touch on also the question of both criminal investigations happening in concurrence. As I think I've talked to the board before about this topic, it is it's not something that can happen. It can't be, it's not a black and white issue. Let me say that. Like, I'll give you an example. The Lodo shooting where we had an officer we had an officer involved shooting where innocent bystanders were shot and injured seriously because of those actions. That officer in that case faced criminal allegations, criminal process. That takes precedent, and that normally does take precedent over any administrative actions and findings. And any administrative investigation. What we don't want is we don't want to have the administrative investigation and the administrative investigative actions somehow come into conflict with the criminal investigation. There's different things that happen in a criminal investigation where someone's facing criminal penalties or actions versus an administrative. One is being the most singular, or the biggest one is the ability to compel someone's statement that's an employee, or for someone to have the Miranda rights around being willingly giving a statement about their actions. So when you're being interviewed in a criminal investigation, you're given your Miranda rights and you have the ability to waive those rights. You have your Fifth Amendment protections against self-incrimination. You have all those things. When you're in an administrative investigation, you can be ordered to answer questions based on, and that'll be a condition of your employment. So then the admissibility of that statement and those things that are found in those administrative investigations, there's question around, and they're not always admissible in a criminal matter, and it gets very complicated. So what I've said before on this matter, and what I'll continue to say, is I do believe that there are some criminal investigations where the administrative investigation can run concurrently. An example I give is an officer that receives an off-duty DUI. A lot of times those can proceed concurrently, those processes, the criminal investigation and the administrative investigation. But I will always ask that our police department, Internal Affairs Bureau, defer to the criminal prosecutor, whether it's our district attorney, whether it's another jurisdiction's prosecution team, that they defer to them on whether we do the administrative investigation in concurrence. If we do, we would like to have their approval, and then therefore we can. But I have talked with our police department, and this is something we look at, and when we have a long drawn out, maybe criminal investigation, on when we can also start the administrative investigative portion of the investigation. I think I covered all your board recommendations, but I'll pause here. Chairwoman or board, do you all have any questions on those?
I know we'll get to the EBD question, and maybe that's where we go next, Director Saldate. But if folks have questions other than on EBD. Okay.
Happy to start discussing the EBD, the education-based discipline proposal that has the Denver Police Department has proposed, that is working with, that they are meeting with community, have met with community groups, and are continuing to refine that proposal for its hopeful implementation here soon. This kind of timeline wise, I believe, this started late last year. I know the department had been working on this for some time around exploring the idea of it, looking at the process involving it. I won't go back into the participation of the monitor and getting the independent monitors formal recommendations and opinion on it. We've talked about that. That's been the subject of previous meetings. But that was delayed, the implementation that DPD wanted to fulfill what I believe, and I'm in agreement with you all, that you all have valuable input and position on on what it is, and also needed time to get community input. More community input, because some had been involved and getting more involved in that. I will give Chief credit and Chief Thomas credit and his team credit. They have been very diligent about going out to community, engaging with community. The chief participated in a panel discussion around this with experts in this field, talking about this with community. I hope you all know and have seen through his actions, the chief is always willing to engage in that. And I really admire him and how he shows up in community and is always willing to listen to input and listen intently on people's feedback on how the police department is doing, and in particular, this proposal about education-based discipline.
I guess I'll stop you there. You know, since the beginning of the year and since the COB, you know, started to get our arms around what was happening here, we advocated for a structured approach to community engagement. I will posit here that just presenting the topic to community is not community engagement, and it is insufficient to meet the, you know, ask of the COB. The ask we have is to build a structured process to proceed through this idea. And I will say also that on its face, the COB does not agree with this proposal. So the premise that we're sort of like taking feedback and you've gotten our feedback and are still proceeding forward, I think is problematic. And I want to just say that right out loud. This is not something the board agrees with. We do not think this improves the discipline process. In fact, it creates a huge amount of complexity for something that we all agree is too long for a majority of the discipline actions. I know that the monitor's office has come out and directly opposed this as well. So I'll say, you know, it's fine if the chief wants to talk about this in public, because that's where we should have started with, like, we have this kernel of an idea, but, you know, we are against this as a premise. We are not against the idea that education helps improve employee behavior, right? I think we can all see circumstances where that's true, but solving the problem of a too long process by creating a secondary process for a majority of the disciplinary actions is problematic on its face and does not solve the root cause of the action. We've just talked about a couple of things we could do to reduce the time frame, right? You know, it would be satisfying to, I think, to the board to have education as an outcome of a disciplinary process, but sort of full steam ahead just because you've gotten one round of feedback from the monitor's office after we had to, you know, sort of raise the red flag that this was not following the city charter in terms of its requirement to proceed through the monitor's office with any significant policy changes. You know, the process on its face is bad. It continues to be bad. And, you know, it's sure brave of the chief to continue to, you know, go out in community and say, here's an idea, what do you think? But like, that's not a structure process. It's not actual engagement. And the engagement that had happened before it was supposed to go live was a single group that was surprised by the fact they were talking about it, jammed at the end of a meeting. That is not engagement of the community, and it is not sufficient in terms of this process. So I just want to say, I disagree with you on that, and the board is not satisfied with how this continues to go.
Yeah, well, when I was saying this was my feelings of education-based discipline, I wasn't speaking for the board. I wasn't implying your agreement in the process. What I was saying was my feelings, what the question was what is my feelings on education-based discipline? I do agree, and we can disagree on this process. I think it's been more than what you've said about that community process and that community part. And I believe that the Denver Police Department has undergone what they have is a structured plan in place to engage community, to survey and do things like that. So definitely, yeah, I was not implying anything or any sort of tacit agreement by you. I didn't say that. It was my perspective on the education-based discipline process, and that's what I am sharing with you.
That's fine. I'll also say the board represents community, and so I would have expected us as a constituency to be engaged in a structured way in this process. And, you know, I haven't gotten recent information on where we are. I haven't seen the latest proposal. I don't think other board members have. So, you know, in terms of community engagement, I think this is a little lackluster and could use a bit more structure. And certainly the COB is intended to represent community broadly and have yet to be sort of engaged in any meaningful way in obtaining our thoughts on the proposal.
So yeah, that, and like I'll close out this by saying, you know, I am interested in it being an alternative to the punitive process around giving someone punitive outcomes on low-level disciplinary actions. Like I said, the police department is working to clearly define what is eligible and what is not. I think that will go a long way in engaging with folks around their expectations and understanding what this might be and how it might integrate into our current discipline process, where I think and I know the intention is to have serious misconduct still have thorough and complete investigations, where our investigative resources can be focused on those, and the lower level disciplinary matters can be handled by supervision and through training based and education based discipline that could help curb behaviors and have more positive outcomes. So that's rounding that out, but I will end on that and then go to next questions unless there's more questions.
Yeah, I want to know if other board members have questions, but I also want to sort of highlight, you know, we've talked about things between category A and C in the disciplinary matrix being covered on this, and I want to highlight a couple of things that fall under category C. Soliciting, accepting gifts and gratuities, abuse of fellow officers, discrimination, harassment, and retaliation, verbal assault and abuse of the public, disobedience of an order, conspiracy to commit conduct prohibited by law or aggravated conduct prohibited by law. Those to me are perhaps not just matters of education, right? One is taking a bribe or soliciting, sex,
totally
perhaps.
agree.
So, you know, the proposal that we've seen is very general. And I heard you say, you know, we're not clear on sort of what would count under this, but in category C are very serious police misconduct issues.
And that's why
we
I
need a
totally
little bit
agree
more
with
meat
you.
on the bone.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And that's why I said when I was talking about this, that's why the department needs to be more clear on what exactly is going to be included and what exactly isn't. I can tell you right now, those things that you just talked about will be on that will not be included. And that is definitely things that I think, and that the feedback I've given to them, and that I know that they are already making improvements there on that.
I guess all we can say as a board is we'll have to take your word for it. And that's a bad place to be.
Well, I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm saying that they're making those improvements and that'll be part of the final when they propose this again to the monitor.
Do other board members have? Karen, go ahead.
So TOGA was the community group that met with Chief Thomas most recently, and a review of the data collection involved with the program he was proposing revealed that it was not scientifically based, and that there were very few indications that research had been done that reflected a way of improving the kind of behavior that we see coming from our police officers based on this particular project that he was proposing. So I want to certainly encourage you to pursue education-based research that reveals an improvement in the kind of behavior that we see officers indulge in, and as opposed to the emphasis being put on the delays and how to eliminate that. I think that's very important in terms of how you go about replacing the matrix that we have in place now in favor of using an education-based discipline program. And again, Chief Thomas had to admit that his input was part of what he was calling a scientifically based program that he was promoting, and it was found to not be scientifically based.
Thank you.
Questions from board members on this topic?
Chairwoman, I had talked with Daniel when we were getting prep for this meeting. One of the topics, I know it's the last question on my list. Do you mind if I skip to that? I will come back to the other ones, but I wanted to have as most time as we can have for that discussion, especially this is something I'm seeking the board's input on. It's a question that I'm glad you brought to us on, because in fact, I've been talking with Emily about me trying to meet with the board and the independent monitor on this subject. So
Okay, that sounds good. And I know we're sort of over time with you anyway, and I
yeah,
want
no
to make
problem.
sure.
No problem. I want to make sure though I can at least set the table for you, and I'm able to stay as long as you all need me to, but I also know you have other business. So
Great. Yeah, let's get to RTD then.
okay. Yeah, so I'll read the question you all gave me, and then I'll talk a little bit about it, and want to specifically tell you what I've discussed with RTD. I think you all have a critical role in this question and issue with RTD. I think you and the monitor are very critical to the conversation and discussion, and I'd like you to know what I've communicated to RTD, and definitely would like your input on next steps. So your question was, the board's question was, RTD recently appointed a new chief and plans to significantly expand their number of officers this year. What exactly are the authorities of RTD officers in Denver, and how do you anticipate the expansion of their ranks to impact the DPD specifically and Denver broadly? So thank you. Again, this is a very timely question. They have announced the selection of their permanent chief. That chief is Steve Martingano. Chief Martingano has been in RTD for some time, at least as long as I've been involved here. He former Denver police officer. I think he also worked in New York, and he went to RTD. I have worked with him dating back to some of the problems we were having at Union Station years ago, and when he was a commander. I worked with Chief Dr. Joel Fitzgerald when he was hired, and his leadership team. So I'll take this. So this has been an ongoing conversation with RTD, and just for the board and community that are on this, there is a in counties across the country, the sheriff of the county is allowed and may deputize folks to be deputies and enforce in times of need and enforce in certain areas of the law. The sheriff provides that. In the city and county of Denver, that authority is given by charter to the executive director of safety. So that's me. And that is what we call the executive director of safety delegation of authority. That delegation of authority is the ability to enforce in the city and county of Denver limits, city and county of Denver ordinances and laws in the city and county of Denver. That would include for police officers the ability to arrest. So an example of this is like right-of-way enforcement agents, the ones that write parking tickets in downtown Denver are given that authority to enforce those parking tickets via ticket by me. And those are DOTI employees. Park rangers are provided the authority to enforce park ordinances by me and park curfews and things like that. What the RTD police were asking for, since Chief Fitzgerald, was the ability to enforce city and county of Denver ordinances in the city and county of Denver on their platforms, their conveyances, their buses, their trains, at their stops, at Union Station, and things like that. A couple of years ago, when we were experiencing a lot of issues at Union Station, you all may remember we worked with Denver Police, especially District 6, worked with lots of folks to get a handle on the efforts there. We did provide it was a pilot of sort with RTD officers to be able to enforce things like trespass and things like that at Denver Union Station. I had talked with the former chief about his want and desire to have his officers to have that delegated enforcement authority across Denver, in and out of Denver. I had back then was very clear on what that would necessitate for them to do that. There is first a very technical side, and I know Julie, you would understand the technical side very well, but it's the ability to integrate into the electronic ticketing system within the and enforcement system. So right now, if an officer in Denver writes a ticket to someone or arrests someone, that charge it travels through the system, not through a paper ticket, but through electronically, and goes seamlessly through and securely through the courts, through the sheriff's department for booking, through records and identification, through the city prosecutor's office or the district attorney's office. It all travels through that. What we call our criminal justice system bus is a digital architecture for all that, and it's governed here in my office. The Denver Police Department, their record management system, has made the upgrades necessary for integration for outside departments to integrate into that process. However, that's one spoke in the wheel of that bus. The Denver Sheriff Department would need to be able to integrate that, the courts especially, the DA, the city attorneys, all those folks. So one of the criteria for someone to participate into our system and being able to enforce is the ability to integrate electronically. But I'll leave that for the tech folks. We are much better along, but that's going to take some time. The other part that I told Chief Martin Gano recently, the CEO of RTD, and this was back in February, I communicated this to them when this was brought up again, is that they need to discuss with the district attorney, DA Walsh, and his team about the acceptance of filings and criminal charges that are state charges that his office prosecutes, and what they would need to necessitate that. You know, they would need, how do they process their evidence? How do they do things? That is something that is under the control of the district attorney. And back then it was under the control of district attorney when it was initially discussed, Beth McCann. So that needed to be a box checked out. The other one is the city attorney. The city attorney, Pace, our prosecution section, needs to do that. That's not, I need to make sure that that box is checked, that I got their concurrence before I go through that delegation. There's also another component of the city attorney's office is the training about our enforcement of our laws. One of those laws is our camping ordinance. You know, that is very intricate. It's very how we enforce, what we enforce are the elements and things. So it would necessitate training with our city attorney's prosecution section. The other part is evidence and forensic lab processing and maintenance. Who was going to process that evidence? Who was going to do all that evidence? That needed to be worked out. I do not believe with the current workload that our own crime lab is undertake right now that they could process it. So that would have been something they need to have. The other one, and this is the one where I think really, and this is what has been, I think, the biggest line in the sand for me that they have not engaged in, and that is oversight. So in the city and county of Denver, our community, the city, by nature of the fact that we have a Citizen Oversight Board, an Office of the Independent Monitor, the leadership in the city and county of Denver, including me, we value the accountability and transparency of citizen oversight and independent oversight over the actions of our law enforcement officers, in particularly with use of force. If I were to have granted and do grant delegation of authority to officers that are not Denver police officers, that are not under my authority, and they engage in misconduct, perceived misconduct or something, they would not be under the guidance or the oversight that is out there. That is a problem. That is something that I am not willing to do until they address how they will engage in oversight. That is something I've discussed at length with them. I've discussed with them that they've had to come with a proposal or how that was going to be managed. I talked with the former chief about how that would take place. It is something that I've talked with them and their legal department on. I will not even engage in that conversation until that discussion is made and until that commitment and the identification of how they would come under and independent oversight of their actions would be. My best example of this is, let's say at Colfax and Broadway, which is a very busy a bus platform, it's a hub, it's one of the hubs. Let's say that there was someone openly using drugs, and that is not uncommon there at that bus stop. And let's say one of their officers came in contact with that individual. Because of my authority granted to me, that if I gave them delegated authority, they started to effect an arrest. Let's say that arrest ended in a use of force. Let's say that use of force was captured by the body worn camera, all the things, it was not a good use of force. Or let's say someone even died during that use of force. There would not be a mechanism other than the criminal investigation for that oversight. So that is something to me that is very real, and that is something that I will not even entertain giving them delegation until that is addressed. Tied into that are two other issues. One is, with the Law Enforcement Integrity Act passed by our legislature and continued to be, I think, enhanced through legislation every year around more accountability for officers and their actions, especially around the use of force reporting, how we are engaged in things, and our use of force, all those things. I would also require, and I imagine if they engaged oversight, they would require that we have those same sort of practices that the Denver Police Department is subject to for officers that are engaged in enforcement here in the city and county of Denver. So that is the big thing. The other thing that I added that I said would be important if we ever got to that point is that they would have to then also work with our city council, particularly our safety committee, our safety subcommittee, around talking to them. I would want their concurrence. I would want their understanding to make sure that I have checked the boxes. While I am able to delegate this without all those, I think I would not be doing my job as leader if I've explained this to the mayor and he is in agreement, if we did not go through those things. And the reason I definitely want to bring this up is because it has come under, I think, a misrepresentation, particularly during this last legislative period. There was some legislation around the assaults of bus drivers and RTD bus drivers and train operators, which I think is abhorrent. I don't think our bus drivers, they do valuable civil service for our community. They should not be subjected to assault, and officers in the Denver Police Department will get out to those and will take those seriously and will intervene and make arrests when those occur. But I believe it was caught up in this argument somehow that the RTD police could not effectively work against that because they didn't have that delegated authority. And that is, to me, false. I've given them clear guidance on what they need to obtain that delegation authority. I've not said it's not happening. The other thing that I think makes this especially timely, and I just want to make sure, I definitely want to hear your feedback, but I want to make sure you know all that's going into my thought is we have the bus rapid transit project that's going along on Colfax, particularly East Colfax. This is something, and those of you that are involved in our Colfax, especially East Colfax, something that we've been working intently on and trying to make it a better place, particularly around our police network investigations around crime hotspots. But they're going to have these platforms in the center down, I think, over 20 or so, maybe even more, closer to 30 down from Colorado Boulevard all the way to Yosemite, the border with Aurora. So that's going to also need increased vigilance around policing and security and all those things, particularly since we want people in the area to feel safe and to enjoy the route and to utilize the system. So all those things I think are feeding into this narrative. I just wanted you all to know, I've been very clear, and that's where I stood around these issues. And then the other tangential issue is mutual aid and, operating under our use of force policy and making sure that, that they aren't given a use of force policy that somehow is it not aligned with our use of force policy. In addition, I think the training that we give our officers, I would also want them to engage in, like active bystandership for law enforcement, our CIT training and those things. So I know I went on a little bit, but this is something I'm passionate about, and I definitely wanted your input. So I wanted you all to hear kind of my perspective on that.
Thoughts from the board on that? Rufina, I see your hand up.
I think you partially answered this question, but I was searching for the impetus on the part of RTD to want that responsibility, but it seems that they didn't think it through, that they would have to have the same sort of other kinds of responsibilities that go with that. If you had to talk with them about training and oversight, et cetera, it doesn't sound like they thought that all through. Is that accurate?
I will say, I think they are motivated because they want to be more engaged. They are looking to increase their policing, safety on RTD, the rail, the system, their platforms has been an issue. It's been something since they've been trying to increase ridership and increase the RTD experience since the pandemic. I think their motivation is I agree with, right? The increased security, increased enhancements. I just think there's some steps. They do have, their officers are peace officer certified, so they're post certified. So they do meet state criteria around that. But here in the city and county of Denver, we have additional things that we require our officers to do. And that's something that I would want our folks to do. I think that's something that our community would expect out of officers that are operating here in the city and county of Denver.
Did they have concerns that our police didn't respond quickly enough and thus?
That has been a concern. That has been something that's been voiced. There is one other thing I want to talk about. RTD Police do engage with our police department. They hire off-duty police officers that ride with them on specific shifts so they can augment those services, so they can make arrests while working for RTD in an off-duty capacity.
Okay, thank you.
Alfredo, you have a question?
I do. Director Saldate, thank you for providing us with that context and for ensuring that the process has the seriousness and deliberative that it requires. I'm wondering, understanding that safety and security on public transportation is a real issue. What is the alternative? Rather than delegating the use of force and recreating a whole other oversight body to it and over policing people already experiencing hardship, what's the alternative to address these issues that doesn't require standing up a whole other oversight body or jurisdiction around security and safety?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Reyes, for that. I don't, first of all, I will say, yes, I agree. The safety and security of folks that are utilizing and engaging in our public transit needs to be enhanced, whether it's operating here in the city and county of Denver or down south or just around across the metro. That is something, and I know that RTD Police, their leadership is committed to that. I've talked to them. I know and we're committed to that. Them having, people that are operating through that. It's a vital hub and component of us having a vibrant city is having good transportation infrastructure. With that, there is, we will work with them and we will partner with them around all sorts of things. And we have in the past around how do we enhance things without just having a police officer response as the solution. So I'll give you an example. When we were experiencing the issues at Union Station that it was really problematic a while ago. Not only did we, have officers and response there and that sort of policing enforcement side, but we also worked with them around creating crime prevention through environmental design. So the way they design the place through security cameras, through lighting, through all those things that we work on, we helped them come to those things, and they have implemented that. Another thing that has been contemplated to help address this is having fare only zones. That would be that you cannot come into like a place like the Union Station unless you had a fare for a bus or for a train. That is something that in other hubs across the country is common, that you can't go and get into things without that. That is something I know that may be contemplated. I know that has physical infrastructure and other things around that. The other thing is alternative responses, like a star-like response to people that are maybe in crisis, or the folks that are in there is having co-responders. I know that RTD has integrated some of that into their work. And I do want to say that I believe the RTD, from their police officers to their management to their security guards, are working very hard and very diligently to create a safer environment. I think it's a big problem across the city around this that we're dealing with, and we're definitely willing to work with them in a partnership around this. But I don't think that that delegation itself is the missing element or a silver bullet here. I think there's more around what we can do around the presence of enforcement, the presence of security, the presence of cameras, the presence of, trying to really create that crime prevention through environmental design portion around the design of these spaces in doing that. And then ridership and activation is also helpful. I think during the after the pandemic, when ridership was down, trains were canceled, bad behaviors and other types of things kind of took over. I think when we have more ridership and more things like that, I think that generally helps in activating a place, helps, I think, the safety of a location, in addition to having security, law enforcement, and response when needed.
Yeah, that's really helpful to hear that this isn't a foregone conclusion. The decision that this will happen once they go through the steps of the technical integration, the training, that this will be granted. That's not what you're saying. That decision has not been made. It might not get to that point. And in the meantime, so that we're aware of what to expect and the points of involvement from us, what does the pathway look like into the next year, timelines, next steps?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So yeah, definitely from my perspective, so I only control the Denver side of this. From my perspective, what I would expect if we were to proceed with me considering delegation would be, let's say the technical side got figured out, all those other things, but in relation to the board, I would like that they first propose what is their solution for citizen oversight, for independent oversight over misconduct, alleged misconduct, you support those things. And how does that equate to the expectations of our community? I believe that you all should engage with the board at that time, or they should engage with the board at that time. I don't know if they look at the board as, falling under the jurisdiction of the board and the Office of Independent Monitor. I think if that kind of pathway were to be done, I think staffing, and they'd have to pay for additional staffing for the independent monitor if they wanted to fall under that oversight, because obviously our independent monitor is funded for oversight over a Denver police, fire, and sheriff, not over the RTDs. So there'd have to be, the logistics of what that might look like. But I definitely would want the input and guidance of the Citizen Oversight Board. And then, like I said, I would also want them to engage with our City Council Safety Committee on this topic, on whether that is meeting the needs. And I would obviously take that into consideration, your feedback and input onto whether I would grant that delegation after that process did. So I would say the process does go through you all in a way, and it goes through our City Council as well. It's how I'd want them engaged in this prior to any decision on whether I would grant delegation.
I have a couple of follow-up questions and thoughts. So today they're licensed as security guards, and do they carry a weapon? No, they're
they
not.
are police officers.
Okay.
They're state certified police officers.
Yeah, okay.
Also
And they
have-
carry weapons today already? I can't remember.
Yes, they carry weapons, they carry body worn camera. I believe they carry tasers as well. So they operate just as police officers, just as the state. It's their ability to file charges and effect arrest pursuant to our ordinances that they do not have here.
Okay, so that's the first question. Second question is, how much property would be considered RTD property versus city property? I sort of wonder about, like, does it count if you're on the bus? Does it count if you're at the bus stop? What if you're 12 feet from the, like, how do you sort of figure out the jurisdictional issues there? Because it seems like RTD probably has a presence in, most of the city.
Yes, yeah, so definitely that would be subject to the delegation parameters. So it would be, what were they asking? So at one point that they were only asking for Union Station, and then there was a point where they were asking for all platforms. So whether it's a stop, a hub, and their conveyances. So on the train, on the bus, wherever it was at in the city and county of Denver. And then at a point I heard that they would want it throughout the city and, you know, wherever their bus, you know, so anywhere in between their hubs and throughout that. So all that has not been laid out, I think, before we were to get into the where. I think that is a factor on the where. But right now, you know, just dealing with all the other stuff was also part of that. So right now, you know, I need these other things to be checked off of, and then we would discuss the where. And also that might also be subject to the input of community, right? And what that is. I think it could get very confusing. This is just my inclination without first, that you have RTD police operating outside of the transit areas, right? That would be hard for our community. They recognize the authority and they recognize our Denver police. They recognize how they operate. They, you know, they operate under our 911 system, right? RTD is not on our 911 system. So that is something that I would, you know, I think at this point, the inclination would be on their property and their conveyances.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. And, you know, you chase someone off a bus, how far do you run before, you know, it turns into DPD territory? Or, you know, I think there's a lot of sort of weird things about that. Larry reminds us that it is in fact called the Regional Transportation District. And so the folks, you know, obviously span multiple cities. Do they have this authority in other cities? And so they stop at the Denver border and they can't do that?
Yeah, so they do have, and it is my understanding, I don't know exactly in many, probably, I would imagine in the metro, that they have been delegated the authority to arrest in counties that are outside of the city and county of Denver. I would also say those counties outside the city and county of Denver don't have the citizen oversight and accountability that we have here in Denver. So, but yes, my understanding is they do. I don't know for a fact, I've not researched that, but my understanding is the sheriffs outside of the metro have granted them that authority, because they do operate obviously in train lines all the way down to Douglas County and to Adams and all over.
Okay. I guess a different question might be, you know, the role of RTD is to run trains, and the role of the public safety department is to provide safety. So is there something that, you know, you all could get to in terms of an MOU, where you're providing the services and then it's not a, you know, tertiary police force in the city?
Yeah, well, you know, I think there is, you know, just a capacity issue, right? We definitely have not enough officers to police and to patrol our neighborhoods and respond to the over 1 million calls that happen in our city. I do believe that primary responsibility, which is very common in other jurisdictions, right? New York City, you have transit police. Anywhere big hub you go to, you have transit police. I do believe that that is a necessary thing, and I think it's a good thing that you have that specialize in that kind of group.
I lost your sound. I don't know if
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Okay.
Daniel, it's giving me a thumbs
there,
up.
not there. Can't hear you.
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Julie, I think it might be on your end.
Sorry about that, but
That's okay. There you are.
Okay, all right. So yeah, I think it is common and it's required. I think it's something that's a good thing to have transit police and people that work on that hub and do that. I think there is a good partnership. They do, like I mentioned earlier, have this engagement with our off-duty personnel that work with our off-duty are engaged in that. I do, and I'm always open to more enhanced partnership around that. And I do want to say there is good partnership on the boots on the ground, us responding, us, you know, looking at videos and searching for, you know, offenders and things like that in that world. But I think there is more when it comes to the question of delegated authority. I think we do have some key questions we need to answer before we go further with it. But we're always open to work with them. I know our police department does enjoy a good relationship with them, particularly like around the issues at Union Station downtown. I think it's really been a good partnership. It's just on the bigger issues of delegation, it's a more complicated issue that I think needs direct engagement with folks like the Citizen Oversight Board and our council.
Great. Other questions on this topic? Yeah, perhaps a bigger question to ask is in those other jurisdictions with big, transit agencies, how does oversight work there? And how might we replicate that here?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested, and maybe I'll ask our own Elizabeth Brett of maybe how that engaged in Chicago, right? They have the L, they have obviously a Mass Hub, they're a huge city. She worked in oversight there, so maybe I will bend her ear as the closest kind of expert on that, but then talk with others on that, and I could provide that research to you all, Daniel, so we can share with the board.
Other questions from the board on this topic?
I have a question for you, Julia, and the board. Like, I sense that my inclination to have you all involved, am I off base? Do you all not want this? Do you want the proceeding, or is this not an important issue for you all? I would like to hear kind of like maybe your initial feedback to this. Like, do you think that the oversight of that entity within the city and county of Denver is something that needs to be considered as essential to delegation?
No, we want it.
What do other board members think? Karen, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, my response is that there are so many loose ends in the process, and what the capacity would be to have your involvement in delegating other people. I mean, there's a lot to be dealt with before we actually have a conversation about the efficacy and, like you said, the capacity of Denver to be involved in the process.
Thank you, Ms. Collier, and thank you, Mr. Hernandez. I saw Mr. Martinez. I saw your comment as well. So
I would also say this is something that we ought to be involved with, given the potential for the arrests and charges of people already being over policed.
Yeah, one could argue that the role of oversight is of police accountability in the city that we live in, and maybe it doesn't matter too much who the police are, but really about what actions are taken. So I think it's good to engage the board on this for sure. Are there any board members who disagree? Certainly wasn't on our strategic plan to address this year. So I just want to make sure we ask that question.
I just know I've been in the District 2 CAB meetings each month, and they've had members of the RTD police force there, and it's been a huge topic with the community, with the police being involved, especially as BRT heads down our way on East Colfax. So I know it's a big topic for the community, having more police involved as well.
Seems like a gap. Thank you, Armando, for bringing it up. And we look forward to engaging with you on this topic.
See Ms. Watkins' comment as well. So thank you.
Oh, yeah. Tamisha said, I think it would be beneficial that COB is involved now and ongoing, especially while the process is being established. So appreciate that very much. Okay, are there other questions for EDOS Saldate? I know we had perhaps something to cover with the monitor's office, and there was certainly a board conversation that we wanted to have, so I want to make sure we have time for that. And Armando, if we could get your commitment to answer the rest of the questions via a written format, that would be helpful. But are there other questions that board members want to ask while the director is here? Okay, I'm seeing none. Thank you for engaging with us today. Appreciate it. Obviously a lot going on and a lot of conversations to have. So look forward to the next one, and we'll be following up with you on a few things.
Okay, thanks. And I'll send over the responses to the other questions to Daniel, and so you can share with the board, and I hope you all have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, Monitor Castle, I see you there. Are there matters you want to cover in the public meeting?
No, thank you.
Okay, are there matters that you would like to cover in executive session?
Yes, please.
Okay, may I have a motion of the board to move to executive? Daniel, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure before we go into executive session, you had mentioned that you wanted to get the inaugural committee meetings or talk about the committee meetings, committees meeting so that they actually get started.
Yes, management committee has met. So we're good there. We've met twice. We are working on right now developing a performance plan for the monitor, which we will share with the monitor, I believe, on Monday. Or maybe next week. I'm off on my calendar. So folks who are on the community engagement and communications committee, you might self-organize there and probably need to elect a person to be the leader, coordinator, scheduler person. So happy to help as I can, but I believe you all can do it.
Refresh my memory, who's on the management committee?
So far, Alfredo, Tymisha, and Dawn. It is not an exclusive committee, so if others would like to join, more than welcome.
Okay, thanks.
And yourself.
Oh, I'm on it. Yeah, I'm on it.
I assumed you were on it, Julia, since you were so privy to when they were meeting.
Yes.
And the community engagement committee is myself, Karen.
Daniel, can you remind us? who said
David
they
and
wanted to-
Larry.
David
So
and
Rafina,
Larry.
Karen, David, and Larry.
I'm sorry,
are on the
Tamisha?
committee.
Did you say-
Tamisha is on the management committee.
Management.
Oh, okay, David, Larry, Karen, and myself. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, great. Okay. Great. Thanks. We'll see when we meet.
And Julia, if you could, I can connect with you. Otherwise, we just need to make sure that that I'm aware of, or that there's some record keeping of when meetings
Yes,
meetings
it's a
occur
good
with
point.
attendance, so that we can make sure that board members get stipends for those meeting participation.
Thank you. That's a good point. Right now we're talking about HR matters, but I assume if we're not, that we probably need to notice a public.
So the HR matters are exempt from open meetings, but it would still be a meeting. It's just not an open meeting. And so you
Right.
still get paid via stipend for that. And so some sort of record keeping, even if it's not of the substance of what's discussed, but just there was a meeting, these
Sure.
people were here.
Okay, great. And I was less concerned about payment and more concerned about making sure we weren't sideways of open meetings laws. So that's good. Okay, great. Anything else, Daniel, that we needed to cover? I think
On the list was potential discussion about related, and maybe we'll wait until we get the feedback from Director Saldate.
Yeah.
But the board, and just an acknowledgement of the fire chief, the situation with the fire chief, and the union's vote of no confidence, and my mistake in not including mention of the fire chief disciplinary situation in our annual report, and whether how we want to proceed with that. But there's no hard deadline on that, and we could push that to our next meeting.
Yes, so to say it another way, we forgot to say that the fire chief had a vote of no confidence and also a disciplinary matter in our annual report, which is fully within our jurisdiction, and we should have said. So we are sorry we did that. But the question to the board is, should we issue an amended report with that fact included? It's not controversial, it's public information, but it was just sort of like something that we forgot to say out loud or write it down. So if the board has an opinion on that.
As long as that doesn't push us over another page. No, I'm just
Oh, right. Yeah, we can say it very succinctly.
right.
Are there any objections to issuing an amended report?
No objections.
Okay, I'm hearing none. Great. Let us adjourn, or let us take a vote to adjourn, if we might.
Move to adjourn.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, see you over
Adjourn.
there.
See you when
And
you
can I get an invitation for that,
Yes,
Daniel?
I will email you that link right now.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.